Why Does It Work webinar. I'm Jennifer Bernheim, founder of Right to Read Advocacy. And with us and leading our presentation today is Allison Meyerson. She serves our clients in Rockland and Orange counties in New York. And as she dives in, she'll share a bit about her Orton-Gillingham training as well. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar by using the chat, and we'll either get to them during the presentation or by the end. We are recording the webinar, so it'll be available after, and please feel free to share with your colleagues, community, etc. And we have some other webinars on our YouTube page currently as well. Our next webinar will be on January the 17th, where our colleague Catherine Scholl will be discussing literacy evaluations and what ways parents need to know. And I think we'll go ahead and get started. Allison, thanks.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about what is the Orton-Gillingham approach and why it works, and how to get the appropriate intervention for your child with dyslexia.
Okay,
So today we're going to be talking about the definition of dyslexia. We'll discuss the Orton-Gillingham approach, understand phonological awareness and the difference between phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. You'll learn how to request multisensory instruction, which multisensory programs are rooted in the OG approach, and advocating for your child.
Sorry, it's a little slow.
No worries. So what is dyslexia? Dyslexia affects how the brain processes language. Individuals with dyslexia often struggle with reading, writing, and spelling. However, dyslexia doesn't equate to a lack of intelligence. With the right tools and interventions for dyslexia, students can excel in reading. So why does dyslexia cause reading issues? Dyslexia is related to the structure and function of the brain, particularly the regions involved in language-based tasks. Some areas of the brain might not be as active as they should be, making it challenging for those with dyslexia to process sounds and letters. Now, phonics is the association of letters with sounds, precisely what the dyslexic brain has difficulty with. So that is why people that have dyslexia end up having a difficult time reading, they have word confusion, and they have a difficult time with spelling. On the left is an example of a non-impaired reader's brain, and you'll see that there are 3 areas of the brain being engaged while the person is reading. On the right is a reader with dyslexia, and you can see that really only one area is being engaged. However, what we talk about today, the multisensory approach to instruction, the brain can be rewired so that the reader with dyslexia will be able to have those other areas of the brain be engaged. So an effective multisensory approach must include explicit instruction, both phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, which I will explain in depth later, reading comprehension strategies, sight words, and spelling. So you often hear, and parents often say, I want the Orton-Gillingham approach. And you say, well, who were Orton and Gillingham? Well, Dr. Samuel Orton was a neuropsychiatrist and a pathologist, and he was a pioneer in focusing attention on reading failure and related language processing difficulties. And as early as the 1920s, he brought together neuroscientific information and principles of remediation for children with language processing difficulties. Anna Gillingham was a gifted educator and a psychologist with a superb mastery of the English language. And together, Dr. Orton and Anna Gillingham trained teachers and compiled and published instructional materials now known as the Orton-Gillingham approach. So why is the Orton-Gillingham, or some people call it OG, why is this approach effective? Well, the first thing is it is personalized. When the program begins, when you start using this, or when a teacher starts using this with their child, what they're going to do is assess the child and see what does the child know and what do we need to teach the child so that they could progress nicely. The next thing is we make sure we use explicit direct instruction and that it is structured, sequential, and cumulative. And here's the most important little piece that helps rewire the brain. Multisensory. We would like to use visual and auditory, but also the gross motor, the fine motor, kinesthetic, and taste. And I put taste last because with taste, you usually have to get parental approval, unless your child's being tutored at home. It's not such a big deal, but in school it is. But these things, the taste, the touch, the gross motor, the fine motor, auditory, and visual, all used together, rewires the brain. It increases memory storage. So, OG certification versus training. This is something that is near and dear to my heart because I actually have experience with both. About 20 years ago, I became a certified Level IV Orton-Gillingham instructor through Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey. Now, as part of that program, what I did was I went to school for 4 semesters, each semester about 4 months long, and I was allowed to take 1 class a semester. That 1 class lasted for 4 hours each, once a week. So it was 4 hours once a week for 4 months. And during those 4 hours, the first hour I worked with 1 student, the second hour I worked with a second student, and then the last 2 hours I was instructed by Orton-Gillingham instructors. That part where I was working with 2 separate students, that is called a practicum. And what would happen is I would learn about a way of teaching. I would learn about a rule. I would learn about a different activity that I would want to try. I would work that into my lesson with one of my students, and the teacher would observe me every other time. When she would observe, she would give instant feedback. She would tell me what I was doing correctly and what I was doing that I could improve on. This helped tremendously. So I ended up doing that for 4 semesters. The one student I worked with all 4 semesters. So he and I worked together for almost 2 years. And then the other child, I split the time. It was one child was a 1st grader, and then they moved, and then I had a 3rd grader. It's so helpful to learn something and then apply it. Now, conversely, a training, which most of the teachers are receiving now, is usually a 1-week class consisting of about 30 hours. Now, the training is useful. It's helpful. You learn excellent material. There's nothing wrong with the training. The only problem is that you don't have the practicum. So that since you don't have the practicum, you can't practice it. And nobody's telling you what you're doing correctly and what you're not doing correctly. So that when you go back to your school, because what they tell you in the training is you're going to practice this when you go back to your school with your students. And that's great, except if you make a mistake when you go back, nobody's telling you you're making a mistake. So you continue to do that same thing over and over again. I compare this to learning to drive. If you wanted to learn how to drive and you took a 30-hour class and you saw videos and you read books and they told you all about what you would experience when you were driving, you would feel like, yeah, I got this. I'm going to be able to drive. And then if they just put you out there and said, okay, here's your car and here are the keys, good luck. I think if you had never driven before, you'd be a little nervous because you really have to experience driving. And it's the same thing. You have to experience teaching. It's exactly why in undergrad, they have teachers student teach, because we really need to practice utilizing what we've learned with live people, with the children. And we can't just do it by ourselves because we need to make sure that we're not making mistakes. Here's the down part. Parents cannot request the level of training that the educator has. So you can't say, I want a certified Orton-Gillingham instructor. You're just not allowed to. However, you can let the district know that you know the difference, and that if you don't see some gains with your child and your child is working with somebody and you're not seeing what you would expect after 6 weeks of an intervention, by all means, you can request to have a meeting and figure out what is going on and why you're not seeing more improvement. And it might be a result of them saying that it's training versus certification. That's usually, I don't know if they would or not. Now, phonological and phonemic awareness. Phonological awareness is about being able to hear and manipulate units of sound in spoken words. And this includes syllables, onsets, rhymes, and phonemes. And I will explain that later. But the phonological awareness is the umbrella. It's the big part over. Phonemic awareness is about being able to hear and manipulate the smallest unit of sound, a phoneme. In the English language, we have 44 phonemes. So the phonemic awareness is underneath the phonological awareness. And I have a little picture next that you could see. So there we have, you see it's the umbrella, and underneath phonological awareness, there's all different activities you can do. And on the right-hand side, you see the phonemic awareness. And under that, there's several different activities you can do also that has to do with phonemic awareness. So, phonemes versus graphemes. A phoneme is what you hear. It's the sound you hear. And like I said, there's 44 of them. The grapheme is how it is written. Believe it or not, for the 44 sounds, it can be written 250 or nearly 250 different graphemes. So, for example, the long A sound. The long A sound can say A at the end of an open syllable, like nation. The N-A is the first syllable, and it's open, so the A is long. It can also say A if you have a magic E. It could say A as in AI in the middle of the word. It can say AY. It could be written AY as in say at the end of a word. It could be written EY, or it could be written EI. All of those 6, all say the same sound. They all say A. So phonemes and graphemes, again, dyslexic students often struggle with the phonemic awareness. So it's super important that we really focus on them hearing the phonemes and then seeing the graphemes. And so that is something that, and when I share a lesson with you in a little while, I will show you how we incorporate that into the lesson. Onset, rhyme, and syllable. An onset is the initial unit of any word which contains the initial consonant or consonant blend. Not all words have onsets, but in the beginning of learning to read, most do. A rhyme is the string of letters that follow the onset, which contains the vowel and any final consonants. For example, if the word was sat, the S, the S would be the onset, and the at would be the rhyme. Now, a syllable, one of my favorite things. A syllable is a word or part of a word with one talking vowel. Now, while more than one vowel might be present, you only hear one sound. There are 6 syllable types, and I'm just going to explain them to you real quickly because I love syllables. So the open syllable is when you have a consonant and a vowel and then nothing after it. For example, if you have a W and an E, that says we. The E, because it's open, gets to shout its name out the door because the door is open. However, if you put a consonant now on the other side of that E, so we have W-E-T, suddenly you've closed the door and now the E is short and it says wet. So you have the open and then you have the close. Consonant L-E is really fun. So the consonant L-E is when you have a consonant and then the letters L-E at the end of a word. So like B-L-E, C-L-E, D-L-E, F-L-E, there are about 7 of them. When I was a kid, I never remembered when you doubled a consonant in a word like bubble versus leaving it single like in table. I really had no idea. I didn't learn this till college. I was like, that, why didn't anybody tell me that? So, for example, with bubble, B-U-B, B-L-E, you count back 3, E-L-B. You syllabicate it there. So the beginning is B-U-B. It's closed. So it says bubble. If you only put one B there, if you put B-U, B-L-E, it would say bugle, and it wouldn't be correct. So when I'm working with children and we're trying to spell that, a word with a consonant L-E, it's really fun because I'll say to them, okay, count back 3. And then they say, oh, look what I did. And they say, I have to put this this consonant in, or I take it out. They'll see their mistake. It's really nice, actually. Vowel team is when you have two vowels together. The magic E is that everybody's an expert on. With the magic E, makes the vowel in the middle say its name. And then we have R control, another fun one. The vowel, when it is paired with the letter R, the R is so controlling that it makes the vowel change its sound. So a short E says eh, a short I says I, and a short U says but all three of those, when paired with the letter R, says So they all say the same sound. They all say So like F-U-R for like a fur coat, F-I-R like a fir tree, spelled the exact same way. And F-E-R says fur. A-R, instead of saying says R. And O-R, instead of saying says or. So you can have a lot of fun with syllables. I know you might be thinking that I'm nuts, but syllables are great. So requesting multi-sensory instruction. While you cannot request a specific program, so you cannot say, I want Orton-Gillingham or I want Wilson, what you can say is I want a multi-sensory instruction and I want to make sure it has these components with it. It must include phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is a telltale sign. The weakness is a telltale sign. So if a child has a weakness in phonological awareness, that's something that's like a red flag. We want to build that up. And that's what I was showing you before. So with phonological awareness, something you could do, you could do rhyming. That's always fun. So you say, you give a word. I'm going to say sat. Give me a word that rhymes with sat. The child could say cat. It's all different things that you're listening to, not looking at. But it also must include phonics, spelling, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. There should be a scope and sequence, and as a parent, you have a right to see the scope and sequence. So the scope and sequence is a list of all the concepts that are being taught and the order in which those skills are taught. And the instruction should be multisensory. And that means the child wants to feel it, taste it if they can, hear it, and if they can use their muscles, either their fine muscles or their gross muscles. So you have the right to say, how will the different senses be engaged? What activities will you be doing that will involve the various modalities?
And Allison, I think taste is a unique one. And I know you've given examples before and we were chatting, but how does that?
Oh, that's fun. So, so I used to use Jell-O, but you don't make the Jell-O. So you just have like the sugar, and you don't use a lot. So before you're like, oh, my child's going to be eating Jell-O. It's not like they're eating a ton. And you take the Jell-O, and I try to pair it with the sound. So for example, if we were learning the short E sound, let's just say, and it's as in the word red, I would use the red Jell-O, and it would taste like cherries, and cherries are red. And so you hear the S sound, and you put a little bit on a paper plate, and then the child licks their finger, and then they trace, or they make the letter E, the lowercase e, in the Jell-O, and then they say and then they lick their finger, and then they say E, and so they're tasting it, and they're feeling it because it's almost like sand, and they're saying it, and they're looking at it because they're making the letter E. So they're engaging all these different modalities, and it really rewires the child's brain. They're able to then remember that the E says and it instantly brings it back to them, the taste and the feeling and even the smell. Because what I remember, one of my students was like, I smell it. I said, yes, you start to smell it after a while, because it smells like, there's one that's strawberry and then there's one that's cherry. And they were like, it really smells. I said, it does. So they really enjoy it. They look forward to it. It's fun. Oh, and this is an example of a child using shaving cream. And it is fun. I will tell you, with my students, first of all, they love using shaving cream. Like that's like their favorite. And when we would do it, sometimes if they wouldn't want to write a word with a pencil and piece of paper, because they would give me a hard time. Oh, I'm so tired. This is so hard. When I would take out the shaving cream, they would write anything I wanted. So it was great because I would say, okay, often I would have them to write the word, and then we would syllabicate the word, and then we would mark the vowels. It would be a whole process. And when I was using a pencil and paper to do it, they would be like lamenting and whining. When we did shaving cream, they were like, can we do another? Can we do another? So it's highly engaging and it's fun, and they really learn using it. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through a multisensory lesson. The lesson itself should be about an hour. Now, sometimes they just don't have that amount of time in the day, and that's okay. Then they could do 45 minutes. There's ways of working around it, but in the ideal world, the lesson is an hour. No problem. And you start, the big thing with this, with children with dyslexia, is that regression is very, very common. I had children that regressed over the weekend, so that by Friday they would know something and they would go on the weekend, and on Monday they wouldn't know what they knew on Friday. And it's like, oh no, no, no. So what's super important is reviewing the skills mastered. You spend the first half hour reviewing the skills mastered. And how do you do this? Well, the first thing is they read the graphemes. So the graphemes, remember, are what it looks like. It's written. So like the letter S would be the grapheme for S. So I would have a pile of all the sounds that they know, and I would show it to them, and they would read it off. Then I asked them to spell the graphemes. This time I would say it. So I would say S. They would write S. I don't say S. I just say the sound. They spell it. In the event that there's more than one way, let's just pretend that the child knows that the letter C can also make this sound. I might say, write all the ways that you know to spell S. Then the child would write the C and the S. And then I might say to the child, I would point to the letter C and I would say, can you tell me when this makes this sound? And the child would say, yes, when it's followed by an E, I, or Y. Then we do a phonological awareness activity. So this is on a review skill. So we would do something like things that are fun with the phonological awareness are, additions or substitutions or omissions. So I used to do this with my son, even driving in the car, just for fun. I would say sat, and he would say sat, and then I would say, change this to a H. And so I said, what new word? And he'd say, hat. Now remember, it's all listening. They're just putting it together. And then I would say, okay, this is going to be tough. Say hat, change the A to an I. So then the word would be hit. Don't hit, but that's the word. And then I would say, okay, say hit. He'd say hit. And I'd say, change the T to a P. And he would say hip. I said, look at that. We went from sat to hip. Like, how amazing is that? So it's a lot of fun. Then we have the spelling of words. Again, it's what has already been taught. So the way this would work is they'd get about 30 words, and it was about 7 different phonemes we'd be focusing on. And each phoneme would only have about 4. And you're going to say, but that's 28. But then what would happen is if they make a mistake, we give them 2 more words for that mistake. So for example, if I asked the child to spell cat and they spelled K-A-T, then I would need to give the child 2. I would say that does say cat, but there's another way of spelling cat. Do you know the other way? And they would say C-A-T, and I'd say that's the correct way of spelling cat. The other one sounds like cat, but we don't use the K, we use the C. And they would say, okay. And then I'd say, okay, now I'm going to give you another word, and I'd give another word. I'd say can. And so they would, oh yeah, I know. It's not with a K, it's with a C. And they would spell C-A-N. And then I'd give one more. I'd say cap. And they would spell cap. So sometimes you add, so it ends up being 30, maybe even 35, depending if the child has gotten a few wrong. Then they read the words. And again, this is all the reviews, all the things that they've been taught before that they have mastered. We're reviewing all of it. So they will read the words that they've spelled, and then I will give them pages to read that is also focusing on, and it would be listed. So it would be, maybe I would have C words. So they'd read cat and cup and corn. And then maybe I would have S words and that sort of thing. And then they write 2 sentences. I dictate it to them, and they spell everything correctly, and they make sure they have capitalization and punctuation. And the way we do that is I say the sentence, then they say the sentence back, and then they write the sentence. Then we don't go to the controlled reading yet. We go back up, and now we are going to be doing all of these things again, but with a new skill. The difference is we're using much less words, because when we were doing review, we were reviewing lots of different graphemes and rules. Now we're doing just one. And so let's just pretend we're teaching the long A sound at the end of a word spelled AY. So I would say, okay, with this AY, this is AY. Now the child uses the multi-sensory. And so they start, let's just pretend we're using shaving cream. They trace AY, and 3 times they say A, they write it, A, they write it, A, they write it. Then I would give them words that they would spell in the shaving cream, and they would, I'd say, day, display. And then I would give them paper and ask them now to write the words on the paper. And then I would give them words to read. And then we would do a phonological awareness with the new skill. And then I would dictate just one sentence, and then they get a controlled text that uses everything up until that point. So the new skill is there, and what they've learned previously is there. So all of this takes about an hour, and the child, to be honest, really looks forward to doing the multisensory piece. And so sometimes, if depending on the time, sometimes I will do multisensory in the review section as well, because they like it so much and I want them to enjoy. And so if we have time, we'll do it in both sections, and it really does help them. So the constant review, the cumulative part of it, is incredibly important, and introducing the new skill with a multi-sensory approach is also important. And just to point out, some people used to say, you spend so much time on the review and you hardly spend any time on the new skill. You spend like 20 minutes on the new skill and you spent like 40 minutes on the review. And what I would say is that new skill becomes part of the review. And so now the child is going to be seeing that over and over and over and over again. So it's okay. It's just introduced in the 20-minute block, but then they see it over and over again. So it really does become mastered. So now let's look at some multisensory programs that are used in the public school. The first one is the Sunday system. And I think we skipped, did we skip one, Jen? No? Okay. Must come after the Sunday, sorry. The Sunday system. And that was designed by Arlene and Karen Sunday. And this one is great because it includes everything that Orton and Gillingham wanted in a lesson. And it's systematic, and it's multisensory, and it's structured. And they have, I've used their control text, and I've used their their reading lists, and they're great. So it's great. If your school is using that, it's good. So Linda Mood Bell, this is something that's come around that people are talking about all the time now. And this is quite unique. And the reason being is that it was created by a speech language practitioner along with someone with background in reading. And it's similar to Orton, that it breaks down the learning into concrete skills. But the difference is, because it's language based, is that it discusses the position of like the tongue, the involvement of the lips and the teeth, and the amount and direction of airflow. For example, when they are teaching the difference between like the letter V and the letter F, when we say V or F, it's hard for children with dyslexia to hear the difference, but they talk about putting your hand on your windpipe to hear the vibration and where you put your teeth and where you put your lips. So it's interesting. It's a different way of doing it, and I know a lot of people have had success with this.
Allison, I think
Yeah.
the Wilson slide for some
Yeah,
reason was not. I'm going to chat about Wilson and then I'll move forward.
yeah, and Spire too, I think.
Please.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't. Here.
There neither one is there? Okay. So Wilson, so I'll do Wilson and then I'll do Spire. Wilson is a lot of people use Wilson now too. It came directly through Orton-Gillingham, and the person who not invented it, but yeah, I guess like perfected it, was trained through Orton-Gillingham. And the only issue with Wilson is that they don't give a lot of support in what to do when. It's not highly scripted. So if the person giving the instruction does not have a lot of experience or is not certified, Wilson would not be the best for that person, because it gives you the materials, but it really doesn't give a lot of support. Spire gives a lot of support. So Spire is the other one that a lot of people are using lately, and that is very scripted, and it also it's an excellent program, as is Wilson, as is Linda Boudbell. They're all great, and the Spire program has wonderful books. So their control text is really fantastic. And I think, oh yeah, there it is. So now both of these, the Recipe for Reading and Preventing Academic Failure, are both classroom friendly. So the Recipe for Reading, Nina Traub was a trained author under Dr. Orton and Anna Gillingham, and she wanted to make the Orton-Gillingham approach more accessible for the average classroom teacher. So she created Recipe for Reading. Preventing Academic Failure, both of the authors of that were fellows with Orton-Gillingham, and they designed the PAF, or Preventing Academic Failure, as a classroom adaptation of the Orton-Gillingham approach. Interestingly, we visited with the Windward School on Monday in Westchester, and in the lower school, grades 1 through 5, they rely solely on preventing academic failure. So it's a good program. It's a good program.
Allison, there is a question. If you have any comments on iSpire, the computer-based version of Spire.
Do you know, I'm not familiar with the computer-based on Spire, but I've used computer-based programs like Lexia, which I think are similar. So as long as it has the components, I think it's okay. So if they are doing things on the computer, such as showing the children, sometimes they'll do like a phonemic awareness, and then they have them reading words and spelling words, but doing it through games, I think it's okay. I've had students use, like I said, Lexia, which is very similar, and it does work. Children do like it.
That would be one component of the lesson, right? Like that would not substitute for direct instruction.
Correct, 100%. It would probably be the practice. What I like to see that happen is that the child is working with the reading specialist or the special ed teacher, and then when they either go back to their classroom or for homework, for added practice, are doing the computer.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So now, why these programs work? When children with dyslexia are instructed utilizing multisensory approaches, they can learn to read. However, the materials must be used correctly and with fidelity. By utilizing multiple senses, the dyslexic brain is rewired and the areas of the brain that were being underutilized become engaged. And I will share with you that I am taking a class through the Dyslexic Training Institute in San Diego, California. And the instructor, her son was the one of the non-dyslexic brains that was that the MRI took pictures of, and she showed us, she had pictures to show us what was going on during the study. And they would they would put the person in the MRI machine and they would show them on a screen words, and you would see what would light up in their brain. And then they would give them instruction using multisensory for a while. It was like a year. And then they would do it again. And the child, you would see the brain, you would see the other areas lighting up. It was really interesting. But they needed a test group where the person didn't have dyslexia, and her son was that test group. So I thought it was very interesting. So now, advocating for your dyslexic learner. So you have a child, you want your child to get the right instruction. The first thing is, you now know the difference between being certified and being trained to provide multisensory instruction. And while you cannot request one over the other, you can be the advocate for your child. And if you don't see a difference, then you can speak up and say, I want a program review. I want to do something because this isn't working. And know how to ask for multisensory instruction. So now you're going to say, these are the things I want to make sure is happening when my child is meeting with the instructor. And monthly progress monitoring. By all means, the instructor, if they are doing the multisensory instruction correctly, they are going to have enough information. They're going to have so much information because you're constantly taking notes, and you could see what the child can do and where we need to go to get the child to do even more. So you can ask to see, what has my child learned? What have they mastered? And that could be monthly. And based upon progress monitoring, if your child is not making adequate progress, definitely request that program review. And document all requests in writing, because if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So you want to make sure you have it. You send an email, you can send a hard copy. If you send a hard copy, just photocopy and make sure you keep one for yourself. But email is always great because it's automatically date and time stamped.
Great. Thank you, Allison. That was very helpful. We did have a question earlier, and that was, what should you do if school is saying that their teacher is certified, but not seeing the results of that, and the child is many years below grade level?
Okay, so one is, the school is saying that the person is certified. If you suspect that they're not, you can outright ask, what program did you do? I'd like to know what program, where did you study? Did you take a 1-week course? Did you take a 4-semester course? You could just ask. I would also then say, ask for a program review. And what happens is they collect the data. You meet almost like an IEP meeting, and they discuss where your child was, where your child is now. And if the progress isn't sufficient, something has to change. The person could be certified and still program has to be changed for whatever reason. Not every program works for every child. That's what makes it so hard. You have to find what's going to work for your child. But by all means, speak up. Don't let it go.
For sure. I have found too with Wilson, they're actually pretty great if you call and ask if X person is certified, or who in your district has gone through their training, I should say. And they were willing to provide that information.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So if you're using Wilson, I did not, there was somewhere else I called to, and I didn't have as good a response. Oh, the Spire program.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay. That's interesting.
But I think too, if going back to the programs that you did mention that utilize the Orton-Gillingham approach, like a lot of those are short-term trainings, right? Like,
yes. And I really do wish that districts would start letting teachers have some sort of practical, because it's really so important. Because you don't want them practicing on your child. You want them already knowing what they're doing by the time they're working with your child.
For sure, for sure. And we're certainly open to other questions. If anyone else has questions, happy to if you just want to type those within the chat, that would be great. And anything else that you care to share, Allison, while we're waiting for some questions?
I'm thinking if there's anything else. It is fun though. And I will say this, you could do this at home with your child. My students, when I didn't mention that I was I retired in June of 2022. I had been the reading specialist, but prior to that, I was a classroom teacher. And when I was teaching first grade, I would do the shaving cream with my whole class. And we would, the room would smell so good. But when I became the reading teacher, and I would do it with just maybe one student or one small group, when those children would leave and the new group would come in, they were so cute because they would come in and some of them would say, "It smells like my dad," or "Can we do shaving cream? I can smell you to shaving cream." And it's very sweet. But there's lots of fun activities. Sand is good, but I had quite a few kids that did not like the texture of sand. It depends on your, and the funny thing with sand is that it gets on the floor and it makes the floor slippery. So had a kid fall too. So instead the shaving cream, then it comes out so clean when you're done. The whole desk is clean. Everybody enjoyed that. And
you just mentioned too, like, using with your classroom, et cetera. And I think it's super important to acknowledge that this approach, teaching anyone to read using a multisensory approach is actually beneficial, right? For all students, not just students with dyslexia.
Absolutely. Because I did that with my first graders. That is actually how I became the reading teacher, because it was a long time ago. It was like 2003, 2004, right around the time that I became certified. My principal at the time was like, all of your kids know how to read. And as a first grade teacher, it's unusual. A lot of times you have a lot of children that are having difficulty in first grade. And she was like, "You know what? We have an opening in reading and I'd like you to go there." And I didn't want to go. I was like, "No, I want to stay." But I loved it.
Great. We do have another question. Can a child do one lesson in a week with Wilson and then one time a week OG? Would the kid get confused asking for private lessons?
Okay. This is what you have to make sure. You want to make sure that it's consistent. So it's not a big deal if you're using, because the technique is the same. So where the confusion would come in is if the person doing Wilson once a week and the person doing OG once a week, they need to talk to each other. If they didn't talk to each other, then you won't, the overlap won't be there. The most important thing is to constantly be doing the review. So you want to make sure that those two people are talking to each other. Otherwise, it's not that big of a deal. They're using the same, it's whether you use Wilson or whether you use Sunday or whether you use Spire, the main thing is the actual instruction of the phonemes and the graphemes. So you just want to make sure that those two people are speaking to each other.
And so is the scope and sequence the same across each of those?
No, the scope and sequence isn't the same on any of those programs. Everything's different. When I was teaching, I used the Scottish Rite scope and sequence, which was through Fairleigh Dickinson. So they're all different. However, they're all 44 phonemes. So there's still the same 44 phonemes and the 250 graphemes. So you're always going to have those. It just might be on different pages in different spots. It would be ideal to use the same, because then you're using the same scope and sequence. But if you can't, and you have two different things going on, it shouldn't be confusing. The only part that would be confusing is if they're not teaching the same. I worked, when I was being the reading teacher, quite a few of my students had tutors, and we were able, and they did not use the same thing as me. And we were able to work in conjunction. I would speak to them weekly, or they would send me what they were doing and I would send them what I was doing, so that we were all on the same page. And that's important.
Great. More questions for you. What are your options if you come to find out they offer teachers with none of this training for their special ed students? What can you demand of the school?
So you're saying that, so the special ed teacher has no training? Yeah.
What state, I don't know what state they're in. In the state of Connecticut, they're supposed to have, a minimum number of I think it's like 12 hours of training and reading. So it's really very minimal.
I would say get an advocate and have that advocate help you get, because if we were advocating, I would say, no, this is what the child needs. And you have to give the child what they need. And we need, I have experienced 1 year, I was actually sent to another building for like one period a day just to work with one child. And it was just, I also know of someone who they had someone Zoom in. The school district paid for a person to be Zoomed in once a day to do Orton-Gillingham approach with the child.
I've seen that too. I think the thing is, also is just, research shows, right, that dyslexic learners need this multi-sensory approach and utilizing the jargon that we just shared with you, direct, explicit, multi-sensory, cumulative, etc. Like, this is what our child needs to make meaningful progress in light of his disability.
Perfect.
So they really should be able to provide you, what your child needs for appropriate public education. As far as what you can demand of the school, I think it's really helpful to collect the key facts first, who is either trained or certified, what does that look like? And also it's whether that teacher and your student or your child has a good rapport too, right? So a child needs to be able to ready, willing, and open to receive the information that's being provided by that staff member who is hopefully trained. So I think that weighs in as well. But you can certainly ask those questions and keep pushing in writing for the instruction that your child needs, and then being able to prove it through data collection that your child is not making meaningful progress. So I think that monthly data collection is really important as well. And like Allison said, you can ask for a program review. And if you can put all this in writing, kind of make your case, I think that would be helpful. How many students are ideal for small groups? I'm assuming this is small groups of students who are receiving instruction. Yeah, perhaps.
Or multisensory.
Multisensory,
yeah. Okay. So ideal, it's one.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not going to allow you to have one.
Some do.
Some do, that's true. And I did do one. So they do. So you can. But if the child is far below grade level, I would say no more than two kids. That's it. And the other student has to be on the same level as your child. If the child is actually okay, they're a little below, but they're not, they're getting it, then you could have a group of 3 or 4 and it's fine, because usually then the children are right in the same area, so you're able to teach them all at the same time the AY sound, and they all are doing it together.
Right. I also think it really, just to add to that, the level of knowledge of the instructor, right? Like, so if you have someone who is OG certified, I think they have the ability to flex better within a small group. That's just what I've seen. We've talked a lot about public schools. I have a student at a specialized school for, children with dyslexia, and there are only 3 to 5 students within that classroom, every classroom that they go into. But the teachers are highly trained, or, in their working with an OG fellow on a weekly basis. So I think they really have the capacity to flex to that child's need, even though it's 5 students in a classroom.
But you can request that the child work alone. You can.
Absolutely. My child had one-on-one in public school before leaving.
And I did do one-on-one with several children, so you can.
Do reading specialists tend to use just one approach, or do they sometimes select techniques from the various approaches and use a hybrid? This is one of our colleagues in Seat 1.0. Thanks.
I love it. Yes, okay. I will be honest, I used a hybrid because I was trained with Fairleigh Dickinson. I had the knowledge base. And so often when I would make my own materials, and it becomes cumbersome because you're doing a lot. So I would make my own stories, and I would make my own word list, and it was a lot. And so if Wilson or Sunday or Spire had a word list that fit what I needed, I would use it. I used Spire's control text. I used preventing academic failures control text. So I was able to do that because I'm not tooting my own horn, but I'm just saying that if you're not highly trained, that would be hard to do. So you would want to know the level of training that the person who is delivering the instruction has, because if they are, then they should not be mixing things. They should just stick with one. Because
right, that makes sense. I guess that's what I was trying to get across before. You're right. The knowledge base piece is
yes.
what is key. I also think if the program is scripted, right? So I've watched my child be on the receiving end of a Spire lesson, and the instructor directly read from a text the whole time. So there was no flexibility to bring in a Wilson piece or Sunday, et cetera. So some of them, I guess, are scripted. Some of the programs.
Yes. Spire is scripted. Wilson is not.
Sunday?
Sunday is scripted. And I think Linda Mood Bell might even be scripted.
Yeah. And scripted really means like they are just reading from the page as a living instruction.
And it's okay, though. This is what I will say to it. If the person doesn't have a lot of training, that is how they're receiving their almost their practicum, their experience. Because years ago, I'm going to go far back, in the late 1990s, I remember I was a classroom teacher, and we brought in a reading program, and I was young and insulted that they would want me to follow a script. And I was like, are you kidding me? But it was helpful for brand new teachers, because if you had nothing to go on. So a lot of the script is okay in the beginning. But it does make it that you can't use other things, because it will get all messed up.
Right. And also, I mean, there is the option, if your child is receiving one of these programs within your public school, you can ask to sit in on a lesson and to see what that looks like. I had done it just so I had the knowledge, first of all, and then also I could converse with my child about what they were doing during that lesson. Like, it was very helpful to see him in that environment and how he reacted and how receptive he was. And that's when I learned as a parent that the teacher was, reading from the script for Spire. So certainly you could put that request in writing that you'd like to visit your child's school and see them in action. They love it.
I'm like, oh dear. The teacher in me is like, ooh, but
yes.
but I get it. I get it.
Just one more question. I always found this answer hard to come by. When I was starting, it's like, really, how long should it take to move through a scope and sequence, or for a specific skill per se? And I know there's like no calculated answer, but what were you seeing, like, to move a child through a scope and sequence?
Okay, so there's some factors. So one is how often you're seeing the person and how long the session is. So I'm going to say from I was working with a little girl 4 days a week, an hour each time. And what I found helpful was every other class, we did a new skill. She was severely dyslexic, so there was no way I was going to do one each class, and it wasn't enough time between classes. When I was doing my practicum, we would do one a week, one new skill a week. So if you think of it like 1 to 2 new skills per week, and you want to say that, just so you know, with the scope and sequence, it's huge, because you have about 250 graphings, and then you have all the rules. There's a ton of rules for adding ing and es and ed, and then you have the prefixes and the suffixes and the roots. You can keep going. There's tons. So if you say on average, a child would learn, let's just say in a year, let's say, I'm just thinking to myself, I'm calculating, I'm not a math whiz, I'm a reading teacher, but I would say about 30 units they would learn. So either right? So like either 30 graphemes or the rule or this, that. So to get, it would take like 3 years to really move the child to where they're doing like prefixes and suffixes. You really need the time, because again, summer they regress tremendously. Winter break they regress tremendously. Spring break they regress. So it's almost a constant catch up. If the child can go to summer school, that helps a ton. And the more you
Depending upon the instruction in the extended school year.
true. So it's and each child is different, so it really, but I think when we were visited Windward, they said about 4 years in their estimation to get the child to be able to leave and go to a public school. So it's longer in a public school because it's not as intense.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. So, all right, good. All right. Thank you for leading our web. Oh, one more. Suggestions to get tutoring for extended school year. Tutoring versus ESY. I'm assuming. But that is, do you want to clarify a bit? Okay. Tutoring instead of ESY. I know we found out, in several districts, they come up short of who is credentialed to provide,
Right.
Extended school year particularly for a dyslexic child.
Yes.
So it's possible to get tutoring. I mean, I think that's that same written request. The challenge I have seen is that they'll wait until the week before ESY to tell you who your teacher is. So you don't have very much time to find out if they're credentialed, right? And so now you're in a crunch. Perhaps you can go by, especially if they're getting tutoring during the school year. Yeah. So if you want your district to pay for it, of course, that would be a written request, discussion within your IEP meeting, prior written notice if they deny your request. I think you just have to go through the process. You can have data to show that your child maybe has regressed over the past summer, et cetera. It's really also protecting the investment of time that the district has spent with your child, really.
Yes.
Right? So you can maybe spin it that way. I don't know if there's a hard and fast answer. I think you just have to make the request, use the data and make your case. Hopefully that helps, but feel free to reach out if we can chat more there. Another one. I have a child with a new diagnosis and new IEP. Nowhere in our IEP does it say she will receive explicit phonics instruction or objectives. Is this something I should bring up with them?
Yes.
Or wait and see how she progresses until I bring it up as to why that language is missing?
Recently, I wonder if I would definitely, I wouldn't wait. I would not wait. I would do it because the sooner you get the intervention, the better. So if you're waiting and it's not on there, they might be doing it already. It might just have been an oversight, but I definitely would say something. Because phonics right now, I think everybody should be getting phonics instruction. And so hopefully it's happening for your child.
Hopefully it's an oversight. I mean, I would definitely ask for what program, right, they're using, and then you can just look at.
And it should be in there. They definitely should be in there. If the child was diagnosed as dyslexic, they have to, that's like they need direct instruction of phonics.
Right. Again, we're happy to kind of look at that and help if you need an outside opinion. But yes, don't wait. Time is of the essence with our dyslexic learners. And back to the tutoring question, I mean, I feel like we really learned the hard way how much a dyslexic student regresses over the summer. So I think every summer until he goes to college, he's going to have to start having tutoring.
Yes.
So
I know.
it's real.
It's real.
All right. Well, thank you all again. We're at our hour. Happy to share over email or phone if you have additional questions that we can answer. We'll put this webinar, like I said, we'll make it available on our YouTube channel and look out for more webinars to come. Hopefully this was helpful. Thanks, Allison.